Welcome, everybody, to another edition of the Scrum podcast. Julian McKenzie here. Tristan Damore is here as well. We continue to do our show remotely from our own respective abodes in accordance with social distancing guidelines. But a lot of podcasts, of course, around the world are pretty much doing the same thing as we are. And this is our first real podcast post-pandemic, the episode 81 that you guys heard 81, 82. We're at that point now where I'm starting to get crossed up on all the different numbers for each podcast that we did. But the last one that we did was pretty much like a warm-up, and this is pretty much going to serve as the real one. This is the real one. This is one for all the marbles, so to speak. Tristan, save me. I'm just kind of spitzing.
It's good. We're actually seeing each other. The setup now is made so that we can both see what we're up to, and I am feeling the Scrum chemistry getting back a little more. There's still some loose ends to tie, but as we go along, we'll get better at it. Thank you for coming along for the ride. I'm looking for my words. You could tell that I haven't been doing podcasts for a little while, but it's really good and somewhat of a positive episode today. We definitely will be talking about COVID-19 because that's kind of the main thing that we're talking about. But there's been some restarts somewhere in the world. There's been restarts in Korea. There's been restarts in Germany. And now we're talking about restarts in our neck of the woods in the North American sports landscape. And we're really excited to bring you a little bit of that and some little bit of the Scrum podcast commentary that hopefully you know and love. Hopefully, but without further ado, J-Mac, why don't you start us off?
I just want to say one thing before we kick off this first topic. I just want to say, with all of the different sports returning and all of the different leagues returning, which is really great for all of us at home to watch and be able to take in, I just want to say strictly with the Bundesliga, and we don't need to spend too much time with this, I just want to make this known and put this out there. There are people right now who are tuning into the Bundesliga and watching the league and saying, you know what, I want to pick a team that I'm going to ride with for Bundesliga. You know what, just to say, you know what, hey, there's sports back. I want to pay attention to a team. I'm just here to tell you guys, do not feel bad for picking Bayern Munich, even if they are the best team, because they have the most promising Canadian soccer player in a long time. Don't let anybody tell you to feel bad for picking Bayern. Don't let anybody tell you otherwise. Just ride the wave, be like me, and ride the Bayern Munich wave for the sake of Alphonso Davies. I just need to get that out the way, Tristan. I just need to say that just because, I'm tired of people being judgmental over that.
Yeah, Alphonso Davies is probably the best young Canadian soccer player on the men's side of all time. I feel like it's a strong statement to say, but god damn is that guy good. And regardless of if you follow German soccer or not, or if you're kind of like me and you don't really like teams that win a lot, it is a very proud moment to say that a Canadian player plays for a team that has Bayern's caliber. And let's face it, he kind of took David Alaba's spot. He moved from left back to center back, and that is just marvelous to be able to watch, and knowing that that the Bundesliga is probably the only, one of the only leagues, and definitely the only big league that is going on right now. The world is watching, and our guy Alphonso is still killing it, despite knowing that the entire world is watching, and that a lot of big teams are catching an eye on him, or just figuring out that this kid can be the real deal, regardless of if he plays left wing or left back or whatever. We can look at his new center back partner, David Alaba, who can really kind of do anything, right? When he plays for Austria, he's almost a striker, and he played left back for Bayern Munich for so long. So, what a sight to see! What a sight to see, J-Mac.
It is. Anyway, I just need that out there in the universe. Let's get to the first topic that I wanted to talk about for this edition of the Scrum podcast. So we're a couple hours out from an announcement from the National Hockey League Players Association on the possibility of a 24-team Stanley Cup playoffs. I'll just read out the statement here. The NHLPA statement on return to play format. The executive board of the NHLPA has authorized further negotiations with the National Hockey League on a 24-team return to play format to determine the winner of the 2020 Stanley Cup. Several details remain to be negotiated, and an agreement on the format would still be subject to the parties reaching agreement on all issues relevant to resuming play. So basically, the players seem to be all in. Well, maybe not all in. Apparently, there were some votes that went against, but the players are in agreement over this return to play format that would see 24 teams out of the 31 in the National Hockey League play in the Stanley Cup playoffs this year. There may be some grumblings from players about how fair or unfair it is, but by the looks of things, we could be seeing playoff hockey later this year. And the one thing I just kind of want to start discussing with you, Tristan, 24 teams in the playoffs. So that's 8 more than the usual 16 that we would normally see. The Montreal Canadiens were based in Montreal, who, by all, it looked as if they were not going to make the playoffs at all. I came across a tweet earlier before we started recording. I think it's Sports Club Stats that had given the Montreal Canadiens a 0% chance at winning the Stanley Cup about 2 months ago, and now they find themselves with a chance to make the playoffs. This isn't a discussion to measure how good the Canadiens are or how bad they are or how much chance they actually have versus any other team. What I want to discuss is having 24 teams in the playoffs, is that fair? Is this a good way of going about it? Or should we all just shut up and just enjoy the fact that more sports are supposed to be on the horizon?
Yeah, I think that mainly for North American sports, and what I mean by North American sports, I mean sports that have playoffs, you're always going to... It was always going to be difficult to find the perfect way to go about a restart, mainly because how much time do you want to spend on the current season and possibly impede on the next season, the 2020-2021 season. I think, it was always and if you want to track back and listen to the episode that we recorded just a few weeks ago, when I almost made a drinking game out of myself saying the word equalizer for a while, about how COVID was the great equalizer. I think that a playoff format regardless of if you're the number 1 seed or the number 8 seed, as we usually kind of know, but now I guess it would be number 12 seed. It doesn't really matter if you had a really good season. It really just matters. The only big thing that I'm wondering about is who kept the fittest, who is the fittest from the break, and who is mentally ready, and that doesn't mean that the number 1 seed is going to be ready to go and is going to knock every team out. Now the thing is, and to answer your question, I don't know if it's fair, but the problem is, what is fair? How many games do you want to play that of the quote unquote regular season to end up starting a playoff? And how much are you saying, well, okay, we gotta pick our battles here, and maybe that expanded playoff is kind of a thing, and you're going to look back in history and say, well, that is kind of a, iffy way of winning a Stanley Cup. But I think in another sense, in North America, we've been historically kind of creative with that. How many lockout seasons did we have where, the Rangers in '94, they won in a lockout year. They played basically half a season. Would they have won if they had played a full season? That's another question. We will never know. So at the end of the day, I think the biggest question here is, well, should we be grateful that there will be some sort of hockey? Yes or no? A lot of people are saying no. I know, a lot of people are saying, well, especially from the soccer fans saying, oh, if there's no fans, there's no game. But what are you going to do when the first hockey game starts? Are you going to tune in? That's the thing.
I'm watching. I'm going to watch, absolutely. And I'm going to watch as someone who, I know in my case, I got to follow the Canadiens as much as I did for this year, but even if I was not in the position I was in, I would be watching NHL games because you want the season to finish if the opportunity has been given to you, plus a 2014 playoff. There's some uniqueness to it. There's the fact that some of the so-called top seeds, teams like Boston, Tampa Bay, the Washington Capitals, and even the Philadelphia Flyers, they would potentially participate in a round robin to determine the top 4 seeds, and then they get assorted however they end up, and then you have the play-in games in the opening rounds, and then the series going forward. And I'm also really intrigued about teams who look at some of the matchups that have been proposed to them and how they view them. I don't know if you've seen this report that was floating around on the New York Post in the last few days, but there are NHL teams, or at least players, who fear, one of the reasons why they fear that this kind of format might not necessarily be fair is because of some of the players they might end up playing. One player in particular who came up, Montreal Canadiens goaltender Carey Price, who in a lot of player polls throughout the NHLPA or through the Athletic or whatever, this guy's name comes up all the time in terms of goaltenders you want for a Game 7, or goaltenders or guys who among their peers feel is the best goaltender in the world. Even if you have a whole bunch of fans who will say Carey Price is washed up, Carey Price can't play all these games at the same level anymore, he's injury prone. It seems as if the players themselves, the ones who actually play the games, the ones who we go out and see on TV or in the stands, they're afraid of Carey Price. So even if the Montreal Canadiens, who barely, I don't think they had less than 20 regulation wins this year, because they have a goaltender who maybe the fans don't think he's the number 1 goaltender in the world, but the players definitely think highly of him. That draws fear into a team like the Pittsburgh Penguins, who would be proposed as the first round matchup for the Montreal Canadiens in this proposed 2014 playoff. So I'm really curious about how teams feel about the teams they're supposed to match up against. But I'll also say this, and maybe I'm wiling. I want to see this tournament play out, but I'm also curious if we're adding these extra teams for the sake of making up lost revenue and giving some of these teams a chance, why don't we just add everybody? Give everyone a chance. And I know some people will be like, oh, well, teams like Detroit were bad all year. But, I don't think adding 8 extra teams is in the spirit of the true nature of the NHL playoffs. Keep the 16 that are there. I get there are teams that are fighting for playoff spots, but I don't know. If you want to add more teams for more money, why not add the 3 other California teams that are not going to be a part of this Stanley Cup playoffs? And give Detroit a chance as well. Give the top seed a bye in the first round. I don't see any wrongdoing on that. More hockey. Let everyone else reap the benefits of or try to reap whatever they can off of this. I don't see any reason why that can't be a bad. I don't think, this is not to say the 2014 tournament is a bad idea. I'm just curious if having everyone participate in a one-off playoff isn't a bad idea.
Yeah, I see it in kind of 2 different. I can kind of see it in both ways, where Yeah, I mean, if you're going to be creative and have more teams in the playoffs, yes, I definitely think that it's more a revenue generating in a revenue generating way. But yeah, at the end of the day, that is kind of the unfair way, right? So on one side, you see, players are going to be given the opportunity to play in a playoff, while others don't. But at the same time, we're still not in a world where COVID and the lifestyle under COVID is everybody can be safe and sound and roam around all the time. So you're giving a percentage of your players. Basically, you're basically telling them, well, you're going to play and, potentially risk that and move to another place because, we're not going to be in a situation where everybody's going to be playing on their home ice. And some other players, because their record didn't show enough, that they're going to be allowed to be a little more safe and stay in their homes and stay with their families and such. So that's kind of weird. But if we just keep it on one on the side that every player can play and every player wants to play, I definitely agree with you. I think why not just have for the teams that aren't in a playoff spot as of right now, why not make it a wild card? And also to the fact that and we saw that a little in Montreal, at least on Habs Twitter, I want to say, is the Montreal Canadiens didn't really have a really great season, but because they have Carey Price, they have so much more of a chance to make it in a smaller playoff tournament. I don't know if you were going to shamelessly plug that, but I'm going to bring it back to the articles that you were writing on Habs Eyes on the Prize, and who is the X factor in the 2010 playoffs? It's a guy by the name of Yaroslav Halak, and he wasn't the best goalie in the world when the Habs went on that run. So what I'm saying too is, I guess Carey Price could make a difference. But we can see a lesser known, if we're gonna go with goaltenders, a lesser known goaltender who just goes hot because because the situation that the NHL puts the players in one place where you only have to focus on hockey and blah blah blah, and there's no distraction, and maybe that sparks that specific goalie to complete stardom and can have a Connie Smythe year. You never know these things.
A Connie Smythe year? Did I just hear that? Not just a Conn Smythe year, a Connie Smythe year? Is that how do players ever refer to that trophy as, yo man, go out there and get yourself a Connie Smythe?
Well, I say that, and people in French media typically say Connie Smythe, but I don't know. I don't know why. I don't know why.
I've never heard that. I've never heard that. I've always heard it as the Conn Smythe. I've never heard of it as the Connie Smythe. That's amazing. Another instance of two solitudes here on the Scrum podcast. I learned something doing with you. I learned something new about French media every time I do an episode with you, Tristan. Here's one last thing I want to just ask you about this topic before we switch to another sport. Do you think that an asterisk should follow, and I guess maybe this should apply to almost every team that has to play in a league that's going to have to restart, should an asterisk follow a championship team who wins off of this Stanley Cup playoff? Especially in this case, because, we haven't heard from the NBA if they're going to expand their playoff pool, but in the NHL, it certainly seems as if they will. Should an asterisk follow a team that wins out of this format? I don't think so.
Well, I think so, but the problem with the term asterisk is it really got a bad rap following the steroid era in baseball. It's almost as if having an asterisk on your championship or on the year is detrimental to what you did. if they come back, if the NHL comes back and decides to have that format, I think, great. And if everybody agrees, and that's the very important part. If everybody agrees that this is going to be the parameters of the 2020 NHL playoffs or the 2019-2020 NHL playoffs, then those are the rules to go by. And whoever wins will have won fair and square given the guidelines that the NHL, the NHLPA agreed upon. They are different from the playoffs that we are used to. Therefore, there should be an asterisk explaining why it was different. Because in 2050, we might not remember the times that we're in right now. We probably will. But we will have to explain for the people that didn't live through the times why. And that's why I think there should be. The problem is, people, dear listeners, sometimes asterisks aren't bad. That's the thing.
Wow. I was just going to say that if you go through, it's one thing if the season is over and they wipe it out, they say, you know what, we're just going to give you the trophy. And maybe that works in soccer leagues in Europe where you basically just play through the table and maybe you had 3 or 4 games left and it's like, you had like a 6 or 9 point advantage. Doesn't matter, we'll give you the trophy. And in the NHL, in North American leagues, we don't have that system. But if you're in a position where you are able to go through playoffs and you are able to go through games and you're able to go through the arduous schedule that the Stanley Cup playoffs brings you, there's no reason why you should be given an asterisk at the end of your championship. I don't think it should be fair to put that on a team that, through this unprecedented time in our lives, still found a way amidst all of that to win the Stanley Cup. In fact, when we were touching off on some of the different issues some of these teams are going to have to go through, who's going to be the fittest, who's going to be able to deal with the injuries best, going to play in a random city, one of the proposed bubble cities for this league. This almost makes a Stanley Cup championship out of this even more impressive than if you were to go through a regular 16-team playoff with no issues. This almost makes, I think it generally makes it almost, if not more, impressive.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you, J-Mac. And hear me out. And I think that's going to be maybe the thing that people remember the most. Whoever wins the Stanley Cup in this competition, there shouldn't be an asterisk on the banner, but on the stats sheets, just to explain the context. And I think, again, for me, context is everything. It's not about being detrimental to a team that won in a context that's different than what was usually done. It's just about explaining that this was won under different circumstances. I don't think that as a negative, but that's the thing. And I think we should probably transition to, I think, the NBA.
Yes, the National Basketball Association, that's another league that is looking to sort themselves out so they could get to a point where their players can play again. And we've heard about the proposed cities for a league restart, I believe in Orlando, in Disney World, and in Las Vegas. Tristan and I both watched the recent episode of NBA Desktop Through the Ringer, where Jason Concepcion did a great Mickey Mouse impersonation. We really thoroughly enjoyed that. But one team I'm really curious about is the Toronto Raptors. So the league being restarted, once it gets to that point, it means that the NBA Finals trophy will be up, which means goodbye to any hopes of the season being canceled so the Raptors could say for 2 years, hey, we're the reigning NBA champions. That's besides the point, though. What I'm curious about is, for a lot of these players who play for the Raptors and would want to go back to Toronto and play, they would likely have to go through the distancing guidelines set from our country where you if you're flying in from somewhere else, you got to isolate yourself for 2 weeks. And the Raptors are definitely thinking about this because they, according to an article I'm pulling off of Sportsnet, well, actually, pretty much more importantly, it's coming from Woj. It's a Woj bomb. The Raptors are said to be among several NBA teams who have asked whether their players can report directly to a potential bubble city training camp instead of going to their home city, which makes sense, just to kind of limit all the different complications of flying from where you're at to Canada and then isolating yourself and then trying to figure out whether or not your training facilities are open. Because not for nothing, I mean, it's not as if every NBA city has their training facilities open, and there's another team in another league we'll discuss that issue with later on, but that is an issue. And I think if you're in a position where you can get your guys in the bubble city, you'll get a leg up on getting yourself ready for training. But I'm just really intrigued at how the NBA is trying to get themselves together and how they're going to start off in Vegas and Orlando.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I think that if you're going to have, especially for the Raptors and especially for, I mean, most of the Canadian teams, I think NHL included, and MLS included, every sport, I think if you have the opportunity to, and I think that's a bit on the league as well, to try and work with the teams that are less fortunate in that sense. If the Raptors have a chance to go straight to that bubble city, if Orlando is the city, to go as fast as possible, given the restart, you also have to factor in that, a lot of, there's so many logistical aspects that need to go through that. Flying is much more difficult than it used to be. It's going to be a tough thing to pull off, but yeah, I definitely think that we're going to, at least for North American sports, we're going to be living in an era, I guess, quote unquote era, where teams will not be in their own cities for a little while. And I don't know, there's a lot of politics that, especially the Raptors, that is going to have to play. A lot of dominoes have to fall in the right spots in order for the Raptors to be not, I guess, as competitive. You can always, train at your own spot. I believe that the training ground for the Raptors is opened, right?
Yeah, I believe it is. I don't remember what the regulations are to get in. I don't know if it's a situation where you have to have like one player at a time or just not so many people in, of course. It's just a really unique situation with them. I just think just sending them down to Florida or wherever they need to be would make sense. And also that particular anecdote about flying in from wherever city you're at to go into Toronto, Kyle Lowry specifically brought up that situation to Woj. That's, it's a pretty big voice to kind of voice that concern. And other teams who have also voiced similar concerns, according to Woj, the Brooklyn Nets, the New York Knicks, and the Boston Celtics. And those are some U.S. Northeast teams who are in areas who have been hit pretty hard by the coronavirus. So, of course, they're going to have their concerns as well. I'm also curious about which players who have been kind of injured over the last little while are going to be healthy enough to even play in this thing. And I mean, that's pretty much the case for almost every league, of course. I mean, yeah, that's something I've obviously been thinking about with the NBA as regards to them trying to restart back and the Raptors trying to see if they could defend this title. I have no clue what's going to happen once that starts back, and looks as if maybe mid-July might also be a starting point for them as well. It's just, I as long as it's safe for everybody, as long as it's, I don't know, I guess safe for everybody, it should be fine. That's how I feel about it. But I definitely think the Raptors calling out, not calling out, but making it a point to say, hey, you know what, let's get our players in the bubble cities, as opposed to just having them fly into their host city and then go into Florida or Vegas, just makes sense.
Yeah, and I think that I'm not quite sure if the NBA have targeted Vegas as well, but definitely in terms of playoff in the playoff system, and also I also wonder about the logistics of having more than one league play within the confines of. I know we're going to talk about MLS a little bit later, but like how many players are going to be able to sustain, are going to be able to be sustained within one little kind of bubble, I guess. And there was also doubts regarding how every player is going to need to be quarantined in a resort style hotel, but the people working at those resort style hotels will be able to roam around and leave work and go home, which can affect the possibility of a player or a worker contracting COVID and then spreading it through to the players. And then I personally think that, in the NHL, there's a lot of protection going on. I think you can even maybe impose players to have some sort of a face visor situation. But in basketball, it's pretty much skin to skin. Like people are going into each other, and it's really tough to see the game of basketball being played without contact. So that's going to be another thing to potentially look for. I'm sure the NBA are monitoring that and seeing what can be done for that as well. And also what could be done for players who, and we've seen it in soccer, we've seen it over in Europe, players that do break quarantine and do stuff because, not everybody is taking care of the situation as good as they can.
What about when players, if once they get brought together and a player gets tests positive for coronavirus, or two players? I mean, we've seen in other leagues once they've restarted that they have players on different teams who end up testing positive for coronavirus. Should the league stop play? Should they suspend play? What do they do with the team? There's a whole bunch of questions that I'm sure the NBA is still trying to figure out. But do you think a team, or do you think the league should suspend play if one player ends up testing positive for the coronavirus?
And that's a great question, and I hope that it's something that's been all of the leagues in North America and the world to really bring it far is actively thinking about and actively working on. I know there's a lot of people have been not laughing at, but saying it was kind of harsh in the Bundesliga where one of the head coach, I think it was the coach of Augsburg, went out to get some toothpaste and he got suspended for his team's home opener because he broke quarantine. So how harsh do you need to go? And that's a good question because it looks like in the NBA there will have to be a 2-week government mandated quarantine period, and to be fair, like a lot of people might not be down for that. A lot of people might just say, well, damn, like I'm by myself, no family, no friends, no nothing. I can't even go out to go grab some goddamn toothpaste, so but the confines of it being for this league for leagues to be able to restart, you're going to need to have more I guess to have harsher rulings, and people are going to have to understand that. But at the end of the day, a lot of those leagues depend on money from advertising, money from all over the place. So maybe those leagues are starting to feel the pressure a little bit to restart and to have some sort of product to be able to broadcast across the world. So I think hopefully at the end of the day, my hope is that people are doing it the right way.
Do you want to segue over to Major League Soccer and talk about the Montreal Impact and talk about how the MLS, I believe, you could correct me if I'm wrong, also considering to restart play in Orlando, Florida? I believe that is where they're trying to get all of these different teams in to restart play, and also a lot of different MLS teams have been able to get into their training facilities to have their players do workouts. But the Montreal Impact, unfortunately, as of now, not one of those teams, and they're currently trying to find, I'm sure they're trying to find ways to get around that, and only players right now can, do their thing on their own. The only thing is, a guy like Steven Saba, oh, was I off air? My bad. I think I'm off. Oh, shit.
2 or 3 weeks. So every team, it seemed like, and I'll give a shout out to Pablo Maurer and Jeff Rauter, Paul Tenorio, Sam Steichel, the whole team at The Athletic Soccer in the U.S. Reported on that, and it seemed like the first plan was to have every team fly down to Orlando for June 1st and then quarantine for 2 weeks for the government mandated 2 weeks, and then start, I guess, playing again. It wasn't completely sure as to if the whole season was going to be played there, if there was going to be some sort of playoff system. It seemed like it was the plan was to go down there and then start playing some games in order to have the MLS season, which is an anniversary season, which was going to be a really important one for MLS. It was their 25th year. So that also hurt a little bit on that front. But so MLS allowed training facilities to open in the markets that allowed for that, for individual training and workouts. However, and here's where we're going to kind of transition into the Montreal Impact, is that the situation in Montreal is very unique in the sense that Montreal is the epicenter for COVID-19 in the country of Canada. However, the situation is going well. The Impact started, lobbying that they wanted to reopen Centre-Nutrilait, their training facility, but the city officials denied their access. They're saying that they will give the green light to every team at once. So if the situation gets better, they will greenlight everyone. They won't prioritize the Impact over the Canadians or the Alouettes or the other clubs in the city. Now, the big thing and what happened last week was Steven Saba's injury. So Steven Saba, for those of you who don't follow the Impact, is one of the Impact's newest signing. A Haitian international. He fractured his foot jogging in the city, and for those of you who aren't familiar with the city, Montreal doesn't have the best roads.
Pothole city. Like, I saw so many people comment on that story and just be like, oh, it's an indictment on how bad the roads are here in Montreal. They are terrible.
So I'm kind of putting you on the spot, but do you have the Impact press release in question?
I could totally pull that up for sure, because I know exactly why you want to discuss. I know exactly why you want to discuss that press release, because you and I both remarked at. Just of our thinking here, the high sodium content of that press release. Just give me a couple seconds here as I try to just locate it and find it. But it was it's one thing to announce a player's injury and to say that they're going to be out for a while. Of course, in this time, everything is just kind of upside down. However, it seemed as if in the Montreal Impact statement that they made on Stephen Saba's injury, it felt a little bit targeted. And once I'm able to pull up the press release in question, I'll read it out to you, and you all at home can determine for yourselves if you feel the same way as well, but I think Tristan and I feel the same way. So I'll read it here. Midfielder Stephen Saba will miss competitive action after suffering a broken left foot. The injury will keep him sidelined for 8 to 12 weeks. The Haitian international suffered the injury on a routine jog near his home in Montreal. Despite MLS allowing individual workouts on a voluntary basis enforced by a strict security protocol at the club's training facilities, the Impact is one of 6 clubs still waiting for the green light from local health authorities before they can resume training. Like, you're putting yourself out there as like, hey, we're one of those guys out there who can't train at our own venue. And I get the sense just reading it, they're kind of saying, hey, maybe if you opened up our facilities, this type of injury wouldn't have happened in the roads, which are as bad as they are.
Yeah, and I thought that was a little bit, and I think we both thought that it was a little bit on the salty side. However, there's 2 ways to see this, and the 2 ways are very valid. On one end, you got to say, there's a good chance, there's a very good chance that if Stephen Saba was running around the pitch at Centre Nutrillet, he would not have gotten injured. There's a great chance. If it's the stepping in the pothole thing while, I don't know, he was looking in the distance or whatever, we all, it all happened to us if we're just getting distracted from something, regardless of if it's like running into a tree or a pole or maybe stepping the wrong way on the curb of a sidewalk or something. That happens. This happens. However, what I found weird, I guess, I don't know exactly the word, but is why blaming city officials who want to ensure the health and safety of its constituents and a professional soccer team and its players are included in that. They live in the community, and if the city doesn't feel like it's safe, it's hard to argue that it should that a facility should reopen if there is, in their eyes, still a risk. So I'll put that out there. However, the other side of the story to me is if MLS, and I'll bring it back to the June 1st restart in Orlando. If as a league you want to have a restart that soon, because June 1st is creeping up. It's we're getting closer to June. You have to, as a league, try and find some sort of way to accommodate those 6 teams that can't benefit from their own training facilities. To me, if let's say by the time this podcast is uploaded and dropped, every team is allowed to travel to Orlando to start playing or start training or whatever, a lot of teams, or those 6 teams, will be at a disadvantage. To me, because you don't have as much proximity with the trainers, they can't take advantage of the facilities and like the weight rooms and whatnot, and everything that we know that comes with professional setups. Not to say that individual players don't have professional setups, but when you're a professional athlete, a lot goes into making your body as good as it can be and as game ready as it can be, right? And having a facility to allow you to do that definitely helps. So I think before starting to think about a restart, at least on the MLS side, it seems like on the MLS side it's a little more pressing. Maybe start working with the teams that aren't allowed to go back to their training grounds. And I don't know in what way they can work with that, but ensure that there's some sort of fairness in this unfair time that we're living in.
Yeah, I think that's well said. I feel for those teams that right now are just kind of behind the eight ball with how this has all been going down, including the Montreal Impact. And who knows if Steven Saba would not have been injured if it got to a point where the facilities were open for the Impact. Certainly it would not have been as a result of the roads or a pothole or whatever ended up damaging his left foot. But unfortunately, he's out for at least the next 2 months, if not more. But the MLS at this point, just to ensure for fair competition, they need to make sure that these teams that do not have access to these facilities that are theirs, but for whatever reason their governments won't let them use, they can still find a way to, to find ways to train, even if it means them finding another location that could work, whether it's in Canada or in the States, just something that will have that work. But even then, does that mean some of these teams who may have to move around to make things work, does that mean they're going to have to be subjected to isolation? Is that going to be something that could put them back on their training schedule? There's a whole bunch of different things that need to be worked out here, but the MLS has to step in. It's imperative that they do.
Yeah, just before we end this show, there's and it's still somewhat on the side of soccer. So that's why I kind of waited a little bit to talk about that. But you also see, to your point, there's probably going to be a few teams that are probably going to have to isolate and go or to relocate temporarily in order to be as match fit as they can. And I did want to bring a little bit of the human aspect, because in the Premier League, there are two players that have been very vocal about them not wanting to go back to training. Watford's Troy Deeney has been very vocal about it, saying that he doesn't want to subject his kids to potentially getting COVID. And to me, that's completely fair. That's a very fair and valid point from Troy Deeney. It isn't because his job happens to be kicking a ball around, and that a lot of people like to watch this guy kicking a ball around, that he potentially needs to put himself not necessarily in the line of fire, but in a way that could that has the possibility to harm or put his family at risk. To me, soccer isn't an essential service, and again, I really feel for the people that are in those essential services that are putting their families at risk for the greater good.
Tristan, we have officially dated ourselves. As of a minute ago, the Montreal Impact have announced that their first team players will have access to Centre Nutré as of Monday for individual training. They just announced this.
All right, so as of the day that you're going to be hearing this, my entire take that I've been waiting...
We have a whole rant.
Julian, I've been waiting for this take. I've been waiting to tell you about this on the record for a full week now. And basically, okay, here's the deal. That is great. And, that congrats to everybody who made that happen. I still think that there's going to be someone's going to have to level things with the teams, because some teams have been allowed to train for now almost 2 weeks, and some just get the restart. So there's hopefully I don't know if there's a way to bring that leveled. And I think the biggest question, and I think probably the one that we're going to end the show on, is there's probably going to be a few teams that are going to have an advantage going into those modified tournaments. I'm thinking of the Orlando Magic, Orlando City SC, the Vegas Golden Knights. A few of those teams might end up having some sort of an advantage where they won't have to go through the risks or not necessarily arduous, but they won't have to fly over. They might still get to see their families. There's going to be much more proximity to loved ones. So I don't know. Maybe we'll have a few teams at the end of the day that are going to be more going to have an advantage or going to have some sort of an upper hand going forward.
Oh, there's no doubt about that because of some of the proximity to these bubble cities that are in place. And, of course, mentioning teams based in Canada versus what's going on over in the States, there's going to be that issue as well. But at least for the Montreal Impact, as of a couple minutes ago, I can't think of how many times this has happened where we've done a show and news breaks as we're recording, but at least for the Montreal Impact, they're in a position where they can now do individual training workouts at their own facility. That's a step in the right direction for them in order to get ready for once Major League Soccer restarts.
It is a step, and hopefully, I don't know, I think if everybo's safe, if everybody does and I really stress it, if we do this the right way, there's a glimpse of hope that we can see some sports back. You know, we saw NASCAR a few days ago has restarted. Every stuff in Germany and Korea, it seems like it's holding up as far as we know on the day that we're recording. But hopefully, and I think everybody here wants to see some sports back. So hopefully, fingers crossed that everything is going to go fine.
Absolutely.
You have some final thoughts before we go, J-Mac?
The final thoughts I have, wow. This, like I mentioned before, I can't think of too many times where we've done a show, and then as we're doing the show, news breaks. But it's a whole other thing when the very topic you're discussing, like, news breaks on that, and it completely kind of shuts down all of the takes you had about it. Also, I'm not sure how this will come out in terms of editing after that, but apologies on my end for my internet issues for breaking out at different points. I'm sure it'll clean up and sound nice in time for you all to listen, but I just want to apologize just for everyone. During the show, there were moments where I did kind of drop out because of the internet, and that is the reality for so many people right now. So, thanks for sticking with that. And, that's pretty much all I have to say. What do you have any final thoughts?
That's good. I mean, I'm sure I've probably been a little bit in and out as well. But it seemed like it was a very first, and it also kind of seemed like the Impact were listening to us. It was they were kind of eavesdropping on us.
They were all like, these guys are talking about this. Well, let's hit them with this. Yeah,
that's it.
But
but I'm glad I still got the takeout because I still think the league has some sort of responsibility going forward, and the take was still there. The press release was still there, and we still got to talk about it. So, big thanks to Kevin Arame, producer Kevin, as we now call him, and the Sports Podcasting Network for being our hosts, our podcast network hosts nowadays. Go check them out. They are on Twitter at, God damn it, I probably should have put that before. All right, so you can go check them out on Twitter at SportsPodNet. For Julian McKenzie, I'm Tristan Damour, and we'll hear you all next time.